The storm came in heavy, dark as sin itself. Wind tore across the canyon floor, shaking Jonah Kane's cabin like a coffin lid rattling on its hinges. He had lived alone for 12 years, and storms like this usually brought him comfort. Nature's roar louder than the memories clawing in his head. But on that night, thunder peeled the sky apart, and lightning carved a figure into his life he never expected to see. At the far fence line, through sheets of rain, a pale shape staggered. Bare feet sank in the mud, legs trembling, arms wrapped tight around nothing. She collapsed against the wood post with a sound that was half scream, half breath. And Jonah, the man who had sworn never to open his gate for another soul, felt his body move before his mind could catch it. She was naked, torn by briars, her skin marked with lashes that had not yet healed, and bruises blooming like ugly flowers across her back and shoulders. Mud streaked her hair, plastering it to her face. She clung to the fence as though it were the last strong thing in a collapsing world. Her sobs were carried off by the thunder, but Jonah heard them. He heard every broken syllable in them. He froze. The cabin door swung in the wind behind him, light spilling out. For 12 years he had lived with silence, his punishment and his shield. He knew the cruelty of neighbors, the weight of gossip, the sting of betrayal. And now here she was, a stranger who bore the marks of some unspeakable torment. His solitude cracked open like dry timber in a fire. "Help me!" Her voice was raw, hardly more than a gasp. Her arms wrapped around the post, her body shivering in the downpour. Jonah moved, slowly, as though crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. He laid his coat over her shoulders, the old leather heavy and smelling of wood smoke. Her body jerked at his touch, then collapsed forward, her forehead pressing into his chest as though he were the first wall she hadn't been thrown against. The rain swallowed them both, washing blood and mud down into the dirt. He lifted her, weightless with hunger, fragile as a secret too long hidden. Inside, the fire still burned. He carried her through the door, the storm slamming shut behind him. The question cracked like thunder in his mind. Who had sent her crawling through the storm? And what kind of men would come searching when they found she was gone? Jonah laid her down near the hearth, the glow of the fire softening the violence written across her body. Steam rose from her wet skin as he pulled a wool blanket over her, his rough hands hesitant as though he were touching a ghost. The storm battered the windows, but the cabin had become another world. Warm, fragile, dangerous in a way Jonah had not felt in years. He crouched by the fire, ladling water into a pot. The hiss of it over flames was the only sound besides her shallow breaths. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Only her eyes shifted, restless, uncertain, tracking him as though he might vanish if she blinked too long. Jonah had no practice in kindness anymore. Solitude had turned him into a shadow. Yet now he found himself setting bread to warm, boiling herbs for tea, laying a clean cloth beside the fire to dry. He wanted to ask her name, wanted to demand where she had come from and what monsters had left those marks on her skin. But the questions stuck in his throat. He feared the answers. Instead, he gave her silence. A silence that said, "You can breathe here. You don't have to run for one night." When the bread was ready, he broke it, setting a piece on a wooden plate beside her. She reached for it with trembling fingers, pausing as though expecting him to snatch it back. When he didn't, she ate. Slowly at first, then with a hunger that hurt to watch. Jonah turned away, staring at the fire, letting her devour without shame. Later, when the storm was a dull rumble over the hills, Jonah stretched out on his bedroll near the door. He lay with his back turned, eyes closed, every muscle tight. But he did not sleep. He heard her shift under the blanket, heard her breathe through her nose, ragged and uneven. Once, he caught the faintest whisper, something like a prayer or a curse, before it drowned in silence again. Jonah pretended to sleep, but he was listening. Listening to the fragile rhythm of another human being sharing his roof for the first time in 12 years. And in that listening, he felt something stir in him. Not desire, not yet. Something smaller, sharper, a dangerous flicker of belonging. But he knew the West never allowed gifts without cost. If she had stumbled into his life half dead, then what hunted her was still out there, waiting. Dawn broke slow and gray, the land steaming from last night's storm. Jonah rose before the woman stirred, moving through his morning chores with the unease of a man who knew his life had shifted on its hinges. He fetched water, split kindling, fed the fire. When he returned, she was awake, sitting up with the blanket drawn high, eyes darting to every shadow in the room. For the first time, Jonah spoke. "You hungry still?" His voice was rough from disuse, a low gravel that startled even him. She nodded barely. He set a bowl of porridge before her, and as she ate in silence, he noticed her hands, small, delicate, yet scarred across the knuckles. Those weren't the hands of a farmer's daughter or a pampered bride. They were hands that had fought against something or someone. When the bowl was empty, she whispered, "Elara." The name hung in the cabin like smoke. Jonah didn't ask for more. He simply gave a short nod. Names were powerful things out here, and hers was enough for now, but when he stepped outside, carrying the empty bowl, a chill tightened around his spine. In the soft mud beyond the fence, fresh tracks curved around his land. Boots, not bare feet. Whoever had left them had circled close, then turned back toward the hills. Jonah crouched low, tracing the impressions with his finger. Too heavy for a single passerby. 2, maybe 3 men, watching, waiting. His chest grew tight. Inside the cabin, Elara sat with the blanket clenched at her throat, eyes locked on him through the open doorway. She knew. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was fear. Later, while she dozed, Jonah noticed the glint of something caught in the folds of the blanket. A small silver locket cracked along its hinge. He pried it open gently. Inside, a faded portrait of a child stared back. A boy with wide eyes and hair as black as Elara's. Jonah closed it fast, as though the memory inside might burn him. The truth pressed at the edges, but Elara said nothing. And Jonah didn't push. Out here, some truths killed quicker than bullets. Still, unease rippled through him. He had chosen to bring her inside, and in doing so, he had chosen her enemies, too. He could almost hear them out there, in the wind rattling the trees, in the crows lifting from the fence posts. Out here, every choice carried a price. Every kindness could turn into a curse. And speaking of choices, if this tale has gripped you so far, don't just drift away into the dust. Subscribe for more stories of love, storms, and survival, because the next twist in this story may change everything. Something was coming. Something that would test not just his solitude, but the fragile thread binding them together. The week turned restless. The storm had gone, but its weight lingered in the air, thick as unspoken words. Elara stayed inside most days, tending the fire, mending an old shirt of Jonah's with stitches so neat they startled him. At night, she curled close to the hearth, her back against the stones, her eyes never quite closing until exhaustion forced them shut. Jonah worked the land, but his thoughts circled her like hawks. Each swing of the axe, each trip to the well carried the question, who was she running from and how long before they arrived? The footprints he'd found haunted him. He knew the West. Nothing vanished into its dust without leaving whispers. Sure enough, whispers began drifting up the valley. Neighbors rode by more than usual, their eyes lingering too long on Jonah's cabin, their greetings clipped. At the trading post, a ranch hand asked him if he'd taken in a straggler. Jonah said nothing, but the way the man's mouth curled told him rumors were already breeding. Inside, the tension deepened. Elara spoke little, but when she did, it was in fragments. "I had a brother once. They said I was promised. I ran, but running never ends." Her voice cracked on that last line, and Jonah felt it like a nail through wood. One night, thunder growled again on the horizon. Not the fury of the last storm, just enough to stir the memory of it. Jonah found her at the window, staring into the dark. Her body stiffened when he approached, but she didn't pull away. He asked nothing, offered nothing but a shawl over her shoulders. She whispered, "They'll find me." "They always do," Jonah's jaw clenched. He wanted to say not here. Wanted to promise her the fence, the cabin, the hills would keep her safe. But promises he knew were fragile things. Instead, he stood beside her, silent, until she leaned against him and let out a breath she'd been holding for years. The next morning, neighbors appeared at the fence line, 2 men on horseback, hats low, their eyes sharp. They didn't come close, just lingered, murmuring to each other. Jonah watched from the porch, arms crossed, every muscle taut. Ilara shrank deeper into the cabin's shadows. When the riders finally turned away, dust trailing behind them, Jonah knew the truth. Storms didn't always come from the sky. Some rode in on whispers, some wore the faces of men, and this storm was closing in fast. By the end of that week, the valley seemed to hold its breath. The neighbors' visits stopped, but the silence was heavier than talk. Jonah rose before dawn, watching the ridges for movement, listening to the fences creak in the wind. Ilara moved through the cabin like a shadow. Her locket clutched so tight the skin of her palm bore its mark. It was she who finally spoke the truth. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, she sat by the fire and said, "They wanted me to marry a man I did not choose. I refused. They called it shame." Her voice shook, but she pressed on. "They locked me away until I bent, but I ran. I ran naked through the fields because I would rather face the storm than their chains." Jonah said nothing. Words felt too small for what she had carried. He only nodded, slow and deliberate, as if to tell her, "I hear you, and I do not turn away." The following day, a spark of defiance entered her. She walked outside barefoot, feeling the dirt beneath her feet, staring at the hills without flinching. Jonah watched from the porch, a strange pride stirring in his chest. It was as if the land itself had accepted her, claiming her as part of it. But danger still lingered. That night, the wind carried voices across the valley, men's voices, laughing, sharp, too close. Ilara gripped his arm, terror flashing in her eyes. Jonah led her inside, barring the door, both of them holding their breath until the voices faded into the distance. Afterward, Ilara wept, not out of fear this time, but out of release. Jonah knelt beside her, placing his weathered hand over hers. "They may circle," he said quietly, "but they won't break this ground. Not while I stand on it." The days that followed were slow but steady. No riders came. No neighbors lingered. Only the wind, the chores, the small rhythm of 2 lives weaving together. Ilara planted seeds in the soil behind the cabin. Jonah built a stronger fence, and between them grew something neither had expected, a fragile peace. One evening, she pressed the locket into his palm. "The boy inside," she whispered, "was my brother. He died young. I've carried him as my reminder that life, no matter how brief, is worth protecting." Jonah closed the locket, his fingers trembling. "Then we'll protect this," he said, nodding to the earth, the cabin, the bond they had forged. The West still held its storms. But in the quiet glow of that cabin, something new had taken root, something more enduring than fear, more stubborn than solitude. A promise, whispered against the wind, that love could live even here. If their courage stirred something in you, don't leave this story behind. Like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, for in the Wild West, love may be scarcer than water, but it always finds a way.